Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Alana. Today is the fifth of the 15-minute research boosts that came about because during the boot camps this summer, people asked me to go deeper into my own process as a researcher. So just like in boot camp or in our communities, when you send in data to be, or what your work is to be used as data, warts and all, that's how I'm delivering what's going on with me as I prepare to get ready to write some articles. So we have a series up until now, and then we have a couple of more after this, and then there's a break as hopefully the work continues, and we come back in the spring looking for places to publish and catching up on the whole publication part of it as well. So that's the series that this is part of. And I have to say, today is a day when it's definitely warts and all. So there are common moments in the research process. I think you have probably experienced them. Maybe in your chat box there's a little hand. So raise your hand if you have ever experienced too much data, too little data, the data doesn't make any sense yet, kind of a fog around the brain when you start to think about your data and how to pull your data into a order that makes some kind of logical sense that gets you out of it. At least one hand has gone up. It's been my experience. It happens every time. It's part of the process. So today was my day for that as I was getting ready for this. I came across the fact that in this, one person here says it was her 2 or 3 weeks ago. Just because I got over it a little bit today doesn't mean it's not going to come back later in this process. Doesn't mean that it doesn't come back. It just is. So this is when we get to laugh at ourselves as researchers and say, oh yeah, and we call this fun. And why do our friends think we're a little nuts? So I've been showing the use of MaxQDA as a qualitative software tool. And the reason I chose it over NVivo and others, Atlas TI, which was the one I used for my dissertation, and others, was because it also has this statistical package that comes with it. And so I liked the advantage over time. I'm really buying a software that I'll continue to use for the rest of my research career, because I'm tired of having bits and pieces that I did 2 years ago disappear on me now. So that was the reason for this choice. And I have spent the last couple of weeks talking about it, using it for coding lit. And I realized today, as I'm moving into data analysis and mixed methods, that I didn't really do a very good job of ending the lit. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to talk about the questions you need to ask when you think about data the first round, or at least that I asked. And I'm going to do a little show and tell. And I come to the place I often come to, which is if you can draw it, you can write it. And so I spent a little time unpacking the confusion by trying to draw it out. And you can make your own judgments. I'm also going to tell you right now that we've opened up a WooClap for this, and we'll continue just using this one. So if you have a question that comes up during the time I'm talking, or you want me to address something about this today and forevermore on these 15 minutes, it's going to be www.wooclap.com/15 minutes. Okay, here we go. So quick, to catch up on the coding thing that I don't think I said very well. We spent a couple of weeks talking about getting your conceptual frame together. That one on the top is mine. Step 2 was putting all the folders together, both on my hard drive and in MaxQDA, and sliding in the PDFs that go with those, would go into those. So the big circles and the overlap. So there's 6 And probably, and this is the part I don't think I said very well, when you're writing a lit review, probably the big circles are just the high level stuff that you can get out of the abstract. This is just very high level. What is being said right now about PhD completion? And that's just really the findings as opposed to in the abstract. And then the work that you have to go into deeper is the overlap. So what is said about how remote or digital distance learning is evolving with PhD completion or vice versa. So how do we do that? Well, so I talked last time about how I could use MaxQDA and I could ask all kinds of questions of it about my lit. And I was satisfied with that, but it probably didn't leave you with a clear picture of how to organize it. And I will go back to some work that's up on PD Education. If you look up spreadsheets in lit or just spreadsheet, you'll find how to use spreadsheets to do lit. And this is actually the gist of what you would want to do. You have all your references, all the things you looked at, and some of them had things that were important to whatever your first big circle is. And then some more had things to do with the middle sections. And those are your columns. So then, because sometimes, rarely, but sometimes you might have a reference here who actually has something to say about a couple of them. But you want to have, or at least I read better in columns than across. So I want to have all the things that are said about my middle overlapping sections that I coded all the way down. And then I can see, my head can begin to make them into a story, or I can reposition them and see when they go together and what's going to be a group citation and what's going to be a separate citation and what really only came up once. So first you sort the column. Second, you get a gist of what was said in that column. And then third, you decide how much room that is going to be given in your document for your reasons. So there might be a whole lot of lit about this one thing that you coded, but in fact, at the end, it doesn't really bear very much on the outcomes or findings you are moving to. And so it won't get very much room, if any, maybe a line in your article or chapter. There is this almost like a slinky back and forth between the different parts of our research that keeps coming up as I do the work thinking about all of you in these 15 minutes. So hopefully that capstones the how to use qualitative software and pull out what you're looking for your lit. Now we're getting into what do you do with your data. Specifically mixed data. So how is your data mix going to be used is the question. All right, so the first thing about mixed data is that you have them both for a reason. You have them because you want them to tell you something different about the same. You want them to be two different people trying to look at the same elephant, two different things. And maybe you have several bits of data and you're trying to hone them so that the spotlight they give your work is on the same thing in the middle. And there's a little trickiness about that because sometimes one is showing this angle and one is showing this angle. And so but that's the general thing. So what it has to start in my mind, I just hit me today, was what specific question was each of my columns supposed to answer? And I had not done that. So I did that today. And then it's easier to answer what's the dominant data for your study. So you have qualitative data, you have quantitative data. You can play it big or small, depending on the claim ultimately, depending ultimately on the argument you're building. What's the relationship between the non-dominant data to the whole? So it isn't like, oh, I have this and it's equal. It could be I have this and I have this, and this just helps me fill this out. It could also be I have this, and then I put this over here like a sandwich. So there's a relationship between dominant and non-dominant data that will get worked out as you move the parts around. And I almost thought it was like if I had wooden blocks and I'm trying to build something with those wooden blocks and they're all different shapes. Okay, so okay, so that's the kind of place we are, let's say, in our heads. Process now comes into it, and I like to get things set up. The longest process I like to do and have done, and it's over on the side, so that when I need it, I can pick it up. Because I don't like to get into the organizing and building whatever I'm building with these blocks, only to have to then put the blocks down and spend a lot of time over here getting the process done. So qualitative data takes the longest to code, to analyze, to do all that. And so it's probably good if you get all that done and it's off to the side. And that was true in this case. And then what's going on in your head is what are you doing? What are the tools in order? How are you going to compare and contrast them? And again, that all goes back to the question. So you can see right now why, just talking through that in a sort of linear fashion, already it makes your head spin. There's just a lot that you're trying to pull together. This is a creative moment, and I think we have to just honor the fact that when it's creative moments, we don't know where we're going, and we do kind of go like this. So I just want to say that the Excel spreadsheet that we've been working on got a few new lines this week. I had to add a line for questions, and then I had to put the questions in different places. So just to say that tool evolves as you need it to. And it's because the questions had helped me double check the methodology, and I'll show you. And background here, I spent a little time today thinking about, reflecting actually, on academic thought problem. So probably all of you were taught that research goes like, first you go out to the lit, you find your stuff that you want to do, then you design your what you're going to do, you go get your data, you have your findings, you tie it all together. It's a nice linear pattern. And that may be true in academia, and it's probably more true if you are in a position where you have to get institutional review, because the institutional review requires you to get a certain part of the whole logic set up before you can get the ethical review. But if you are not in those two places, research is much more like, oh, I've got all these pieces now, how do I pull them together in a continuous whole? So it becomes even more important that you understand the building blocks of that continuous whole. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to screen share. Let me start with my Excel, move into my quant data, and then my interview data. All right, so I'm focused now. These are the three, for those of you that may not have seen this all the way through, I'm building out 3 articles that I thought came out of the same data. Found out today they probably didn't when I brought in my questions. So I wanted to do something on the efficacy of remote boot camps, and my question was, looking at the 3 models of boot camps, at what points of comparison can be found, and what do those tell us that may improve the practice of remote research boot camps? I'm a practitioner researcher, and so in my heart, I really like to write about stuff that improves practice. The other one that can come out of these same data are, what does it take to move seriously stalled students on to proposing graduation? And you'll see that start to come out of the data I show you today, but I realized that I'm also going to need to do some open-ended surveys with some people to get more data for that one. And then when I looked at the usage of various remote components of an online academic professional development, the question that I ended up asking is, how do the site stats compare, usage stats, compare to the questions we hear from students? In other words, you all ask a lot of questions in WooClaps. How do what you use the site for compare to what you're asking about? Because to the extent that we can show a very good comparison, then we know that the two are in sync. And if not, then that raises some interesting questions that also would be good to put out there in research. Well, it turns out this pot of data I'm using for the others don't go to there at all. And so I'm going to need to have a talk with my team and we'll do some slightly different research. So long story short, we're going to focus on the first one today, what comparison of boot camps and what may move the practice of research forward. I hope that I have sort of a linear thought process that I've come out of this confusion. Good that you're already asking questions. Brilliant. I just wanted to show you what I did with, first let me show you actually the, oh, I bet it's back in the slides. Yeah, first let me show you the quantitative data that I have to work with. We had 3 boot camps, 949 total students, of which 388 said they were interested. Only 388 actually attended, which was 40%. And then some of them attended enough to, probably some of you in there, to be eligible for an endorsement from us. So that's somebody who attended enough that as an educator, I feel you probably got enough that there was some efficacy to the, because I'm not sure, I can't, as an educator, I can't be positive if you came 2 or 3 times what its value was. If you saw a lot, then I can have more confidence in that value. That's what it amounts to. If you look, so comparison data. When we looked at the pre-initial survey, stalled, 85% stalled. So pretty much the majority stalled. In one case, very small group, 22 students, 100% felt stalled. And then if you look at the differences between the percentage that started and the percentage that were eligible for endorsements, then you see that the 81% of the first group are got a lot out of it or eligible for endorsements, where only 19 people out of either 355 or 228, depending on which you think, were in the second group and only 17 in the third group. So what's the difference between group A and the next 2 groups? The university was very involved in the first group. They enrolled those students. And I talked to them every 3 weeks about what was happening with those students. That it's a very targeted student population from the university's point of view. And interestingly enough, it was actually, that also played out for how targeted the students were. So interesting comparison points, both that they aren't very different and yet they are very different too in how many actually say they want to come and actually come. Another thing that we can do with the kind of data that we have available quantitatively is we can look at not only do you come to a webinar, but do you watch the recording? The people on the left-hand column with the 2 dots right next to each other both came to the webinar and watched the recording. So that's somebody who's really getting it and then wanting to get it again with that kind of intensity. So we can track and we can separate into how many people in which group, and we can do some comparisons with that. I asked some questions about that. So who were the percentages that never showed up? That came a few times? Who did everything? And then I asked, and this is the thing I want you all to consider, we all have data and we can all ask a lot of questions of that data but we have to keep in our mind, how much do the answers to these questions add to my final work? And I honestly don't have an answer for that particular comparison point right now. But I just wanted to show you that your mind looks at a bunch of data, says, oh, what can I learn from this? It's one of the reasons that makes data very difficult to talk about in conferences, because as soon as you show it, everybody wants to put on their, oh, what can I learn here mind? And it's hard to keep on track of what you want to say. Okay, so then if we look one more time, I'll back up to screen share. So what's the qualitative side of this quantitative? I have quantitative comparisons. And what are my qualitative comparisons? They have to do with the data that came in from the interviews at the end. Specifically, and there's a relationship here that I thought was interesting between what they said and what the literature says. So the literature talks about isolation, and I can double click on isolation and I can bring up all the things that people said about isolation, and I can see what the story is there. I can see what they also talked about the benefits. I have data on the benefits. I have reasons for attending. That kind of shows the challenges. And so at this point, I think I'm going to use some qualitative data at the beginning to highlight how people were when they started, then to tell the quantitative story of the comparisons, and then some qualitative data on the end to use people's voices to talk about benefits. That's what I'm thinking. So again, you start with the question, how are you going to use this? Somewhere along the line, you think about it, and you may have a beginning idea. And then if I go back to the slides, I do always come to, I think I've got it. Can I draw it? And I know I'm not quite there when I start. And somebody last week in one of our groups said, what if you keep doing the chapter 1 over and over and over because you can't get to your methodology? And I said, it might be because you don't really have it clear in your head. And so when I saw myself putting in a full box that really amounted to the background information, I thought, maybe I'm not quite here yet. But the background information would be about the models. The background here, I'm questioning, what am I going to pull from the lit for this? Use of remote PDs, history of boot camps in the past on campus, and the need for things now to go to scale. Evolution, these 3 types of boot camps, that's the background. And then the comparison points, and you can hold me to this next week to see if they're still there. The university role in the process, pre-survey data comparisons, engagement during the boot camp comparisons, outcomes, a general comparison of the interview data, and a specific difference between the interviews because of the roles that the university had in mind. Because I think that role that the university is going to lead to a big finding. So what does this say about practice? Remote setup with the big remote backup. So there's something here, and I have to tease out a little bit more data, I think, to prove it. But there's something here about the fact that a remote boot camp has the advantage of being able to say, like I do to all of you all the time, oh, you can go to this site, this part of the site, you can go get that. So the teacher doesn't have to constantly have something to say. They can point to this big library of stuff people can find easily. I think that we'll see that that's helpful. It might be harder to prove. What was said about pre-proposal versus post-data groups, because that's one of the unusual things about the way we did boot camps, and what is the university's role. So I started with a big mess of how do I get all this together, and I sort of think that by superimposing a question and drawing out what those comparison points were. I am not to the point where I can say these are my findings, but hopefully by next week I'll be able to justify some findings and ultimately coalesce into my argument.